Okay, let's unpack this. We are diving into, one of the most dramatic clashes in all of history.
It really is.
You have this moment where the entire Hellenistic world, the world defined by Alexander the Great, by Cleopatra, it finally falls to the brutal, pragmatic might of Rome.
It's the end of an era, and this is a story of empires just dissolving and
Yeah.
a new one being born, but we get to see it entirely through the eyes of the children of the losers.
Right. And our focus today is, it's hyper-specific, but incredibly powerful because of that. We're tracing the life of Cleopatra Selene.
The twin daughter of Cleopatra VII and Mark Antony. And you just have to think about her trajectory for a second. I mean, born into absolute unimaginable power in Alexandria, then reduced to a political pawn, a prisoner paraded through the streets of Rome. And yet, she not only survived, she emerged as a queen in her own right in Mauritania.
It's an incredible story. And we have some really rich source material here that it functions less like a dry historical document and more like a detailed narrative. It really grounds these accounts in extensive historical context.
It does. It gives us the political play-by-play, the harsh realities of Roman society, especially its deeply entrenched slave culture and all the subtle shifting loyalties that really defined this new age of Augustus.
And it's probably essential to grasp the timeline we're dealing with.
Absolutely. The Ptolemaic dynasty started way back when Alexander's general Ptolemy seized Egypt in 323 BC. So now, almost 300 years later, in 31 BC, that entire era is just crashing down.
So we're starting right after the big one, the definitive military defeat of Cleopatra and Antony by the young Octavian and his brilliant general Marcus Agrippa at the Battle of Actium.
That's the moment. The world has changed.
So let's jump right into the heart of it. Section 1, the fall of Alexandria and the royal children. We have to start with the sheer desperation of Cleopatra in those final terrible moments.
Yeah. Her grand vision, this dream she had to restore the glory of Thebes, which had been destroyed years before, that's all gone. It's completely shattered.
And the sources really convey this sense of agonizing finality.
They do. Cleopatra is willing to negotiate anything, literally anything, but Octavian is just unwilling to grant her any meaningful concession. She knows her time on the throne is measured in, hours, not days.
We're told she sends her scepter to Octavian. That's an absolute symbol of submission, right?
The ultimate symbol. And she receives only silence in return. Nothing.
And what follows is just a moment of pure, inherited trauma for her 10-year-old twins, Alexander Helios and Cleopatra Selene. They are witnesses to their own father committing suicide.
Right in front of them. It happens inside the mausoleum Cleopatra had constructed, which was supposed to be this final fortress of wealth and defiance. Antony, just driven by despair, pushes his sword between his ribs.
But the source material adds this layer of absolute hysteria to Cleopatra's reaction. It's not just grief.
No, it's more complicated. She doesn't just mourn. She reveals a secret in her hysteria. She screams that Octavian had actually promised her she could keep her throne if she murdered Antony after Actium.
Wait, hold on. If that's true, that completely shifts the narrative of her final days. Why would Octavian offer her a deal like that? He could just take her by force.
It's the ultimate psychological weapon. It's brilliant in a terrifying way. Octavian wanted Antony eliminated by his own lover. It would maximize the humiliation and demonstrate Roman control without him getting his own hands dirty.
And she didn't do it.
She failed to go through with the betrayal. And so now she's left screaming, "And now, what have you done?" Her loyalty in that moment of agony sealed both of their fates.
And this unbelievably dramatic scene is taking place amidst this just obscene display of wealth inside the mausoleum itself. It wasn't just a tomb.
Not at all. It was a treasure vault. She fully intended to turn it into a pyre. The descriptions are incredible. Ivory chests literally spilling over with gold and silver coins, and most famously these rare, massive pearls just strewn across a cedar bed.
So the plan was to burn it all.
Burn every single shred of it before Octavian could claim it as his spoil of war. It was meant to be a final burning middle finger to the conqueror.
It's at this critical moment, right after Antony's death, that we get the introduction to the man who will define Selene's future. Juba II, Prince of Numidia.
Right. And he's present during the capture not as a prisoner, but as an established Roman soldier.
Which is so complicated.
Juba is one of the most complex, tragic, and ultimately successful figures of this whole era. To understand him, you have to go back. His father, Juba I, was an ally of Pompey, an enemy of Julius Caesar. So when Caesar won in 46 BC, Numidia was annexed.
And Juba II was brought to Rome.
As an infant, paraded as a captive in Caesar's triumph, and then essentially adopted and raised by Caesar and later Octavian.
So he's a captive prince who's been raised to be the perfect Roman general. He speaks flawless Greek, yet he's there in a leather cuirass and hobnailed sandals.
And you can imagine Cleopatra absolutely despises him for it.
Ugh.
She sees him as the ultimate traitor, a Romanized African prince whose father lost everything to Caesar and who now comes back serving the very power that destroyed his homeland. The source really captures her scorn, accusing him of betraying his heritage, even while he just stands there, the epitome of a Roman soldier.
That tension, that clash between this fierce, inherited Hellenistic loyalty and cold Roman pragmatism, it's all embodied in Juba.
It is, and eventually Agrippa, Octavian's general, steps in to manage the aftermath. He confirms Antony will get a burial befitting a consul and that the royal children Alexander, Selene, and their younger brother Ptolemy will be taken with Cleopatra.
But there's this shadow hanging over them. Caesarion.
Hmm.
Cleopatra's son by Julius Caesar himself.
Yeah. Agrippa just says that his fate is up to Octavian. And this is where the historical context kicks in, because you have to understand Caesarion, as Julius Caesar's only biological son, represented the only legitimate long-term threat to Octavian's entire claim to power.
So that ambiguity about his fate.
It's a death sentence. Everyone knows it.
Let's turn to Cleopatra's final hours as a prisoner. Because Octavian needed her alive, right? Above all, for his triumph in Rome, the ultimate display of conquest.
He needed her alive. So the psychological warfare just continues relentlessly.
But she responds with her own kind of political theater.
She does. Even as a prisoner, she changes into this spectacular gown of purple and gold, puts on a new pearl necklace. It's a final, defiant assertion that she is still the queen of Egypt, even with red-plumed Roman soldiers guarding her chamber doors.
When Octavian finally visits her, the conversation is just chillingly direct.
Immediately, he accuses her of trying to seduce Agrippa. He reminds her that while that approach, successfully bagged Julius Caesar and Mark Antony, it failed utterly on his disciplined general.
And here's a critical detail that often gets overlooked. The children are there for this.
They're in the room. They're forced to observe their mother's last desperate manipulations and her subsequent failure. This isn't just political drama. It's a family witnessing the slow, agonizing destruction of their entire world.
It's after this confrontation that Selene has this horrifying realization.
She realizes the truth. Octavian didn't necessarily want her dead right now, but he absolutely preferred she commit suicide rather than be displayed in chains in Rome.
It was more convenient for him.
Much more. So when she finally executes the plan with the asp, the snake doctor arrives in this desperate, futile attempt to save her life.
Because they wanted her alive for the show.
Exactly. But they feared the chaos a living queen might cause in Rome. The scene describing her last moments is just visceral. The snake doctor tries to extract the venom. The visual detail provided is unforgettable. His lips are stained red with Cleopatra's blood after attempting to suck the poison from the twin bites on her arm.
And that's the last thing the children see of their mother.
That final, horrible image. They are now truly orphans.
With the final ruler of the Ptolemaic line gone, Octavian has won. But now he needs to measure the scale of his victory and establish control. This brings us to Section 2. Octavian's propaganda and the shock of Roman power.
Right away, he takes the children on this symbolic tour of Alexandria.
It's such a power move.
It's a clear, calculated act of asserting dominion. The source details Roman soldiers occupying every single chamber of the palace, confiscating massive amounts of treasure silk couches, cushions, intricate ebony vases, all to fill Octavian's coffers.
And there's that moment where Alexander, still operating in his 10-year-old framework of palace intrigue, whispers a question in Greek.
Yes, he asks how Octavian knows his men aren't stealing for themselves. Only for Juba, who, as we established, speaks flawless Greek, to respond with just pure contempt none would dare.
And that one exchange sums it all up, doesn't it? The difference between the chaotic Hellenistic court and the brutal organized discipline of Rome.
Perfectly. The tour then culminates at the ultimate symbol of Alexandria, the tomb of Alexander the Great.
Juba leads them there.
He does. He explains that Alexander's body, which was stolen years ago, lies in a crystal sarcophagus, still wearing his legendary golden cuirass.
This visit is pivotal. Octavian's only 32 himself. He's looking at a man who conquered the world by that age.
The priest lifts the lid, and the source describes Alexander's preserved face and his muscled arms. Octavian reaches out, and in this moment of either utter reverence or just measurement, he touches the painted locks of Alexander's hair. He is literally measuring himself against the legend.
And the sources provide this brilliant, subtle detail here.
It's almost a historical judgment. Octavian's hair is famously golden, but it is Juba, with his broad shoulders and commanding height, who physically resembles the Macedonian conqueror far more than Octavian himself. It's a kind of foreshadowing that the future intellectual and scholarly legacy will pass not to the Roman conqueror, but to the Romanized African prince.
Following this intense, private moment, Octavian moves to the public stage. He addresses the Alexandrians at the gymnasium.
This is pure political spectacle. It's all designed to showcase his new power. The source describes the massive crowd immediately falling to their knees in silent obedience.
Which prompts Octavian's famous quip.
I see why Antony liked Egypt so much. The days of the fickle, cheering crowds of a free city are over.
And then Agrippa delivers the terms of conquest. This is where you see Octavian's financial genius and ruthless pragmatism.
Absolutely. The wealthy have to pay 2,000 talents to ransom the statues of Cleopatra and Antony, a massive sum, and all citizens have to pay 2/3 of the value of their villas just to keep them.
But the most important strategic decision was about the people. About slaves.
Yes. Octavian explicitly avoids taking a mass of slaves to pay his soldiers. He tells Agrippa that the gold captured in the mausoleum is enough to pay every man who fought for him. This wasn't morality, it was sheer security.
Why was that such a calculated move?
He was terrified of the ghost of Spartacus. The slave rebellion, which had terrorized Italy decades earlier, was a constant Roman nightmare. By paying his men in gold rather than forcing a mass influx of newly captured Egyptian slaves into Italy, he prevented an unmanageable social and security disaster. Octavian always prioritizes domestic stability above all else.
So despite all the confiscations, the library and the museum, the intellectual heart of the city, are safe.
They're saved. But Selene observes the absolute dismay of the Alexandrians and asks, for whom? These Romans don't even know how to speak Greek.
The cultural arrogance of the conqueror.
Exactly, dismissing the very learning they claim to preserve. The scene emphasizes that Octavian bought stability through terror and financial extortion, but no one risks their life for the queen. When Octavian leaves the gymnasium, the crowd remains frozen. As the sources note, no one had risked his life for my mother.
The physical journey to Rome now begins,
Yeah.
and it's marked by just absolute tragedy.
The children, Alexander, Selene, and the young Ptolemy, are confined to a small cabin on the ship for the long 3-week voyage.
And young Ptolemy, who's only 7, gets sick.
He becomes ill on the ship and he dies. Alexander, the older brother, is left utterly enraged and devastated. He realizes that all his earlier efforts, trying to keep his little brother quiet, the lies he told about their mother returning, it was all pointless.
When the Macedonian slave comes to collect the body for disposal, Alexander just lashes out.
He shouts, "Only murderers are buried at sea." He sees it as the ultimate desecration.
And it's Agrippa who steps in.
Sternly, he insists that due to the long duration of the voyage and the lack of embalming materials, the body has to be disposed of. He tells Alexander that Ptolemy will rest with Neptune. But to a child raised in Egypt, where burial and the afterlife were everything, it is the final, shocking act of erasure.
That moment must have just shattered Selene.
It pushes her to the brink. The source describes Selene going to the polished rail of the ship, seriously contemplating suicide. She thinks that maybe Ptolemy escaped the worst suffering that awaits them.
And Juba stops her.
He does, in this jarring mix of compassion and cold reality.
What does he say to stop her? How does he do it?
He asks her if she has ever seen the body of a drowned person, and then he describes the specific horrors in detail. How the body swells 5 or 6 times its normal size, how it turns black, how the skin peels away. He reminds her brutally that she is alive for the triumph and she has to survive that first. He uses absolute physical revulsion to force her to choose life and endurance.
That completely sets up the conflict for her survival. The man her mother despised becomes her anchor, grounding her in the necessity of enduring what's coming. This leads us perfectly into Section 3, the reality of Rome and cultural shock.
When they finally arrive, Octavian sends his nephew, Marcellus Octavius' son, described as a young image of Hercules, to transport them. The children, raised in marble-clad Alexandria, are expecting unimaginable grandeur.
And the reality is a profound shock.
Completely. They see faded brick houses crowded together, jostling and dirty. Alexander asks, "This is Rome, the greatest city on earth?"
And Marcellus, the Roman patriot, defends it.
He does. He provides context. Romans have been embroiled in civil war for centuries, and rebuilding is only just beginning. He states Octavian's ambition is legendary. to turn the city from clay to marble, which famously he accomplishes. He points out the immense aqueducts built by Agrippa monuments to infrastructure, not beauty emphasizing Octavian's strategic goal. Give the people a functional, better Rome to secure his long-term power.
But the immediate surroundings are still deeply unsavory.
Oh, yeah. They pass forums where thousands of slaves are being sold, often flaxen-haired German and Gallic captives, completely naked. Selene is horrified to witness grown men who have been made eunuchs.
Which Marcellus confirms.
Angrily, yes. He explains it's often done to men intended for imperial service. The streets themselves are dirty, filled with starving dogs, jostling merchants, and crude mosaics that depict explicitly vulgar scenes. The source really emphasizes the sudden, almost repulsive contrast when they finally arrive at the Palatine Hill, the patrician area,
Where Octavian lives.
in a remarkably modest villa. It's all about projecting humility and virtuous leadership, a stark political contrast to the brazen splendor of Alexandria.
So once they're inside the villa, we're introduced to this complex, tense, and ultimately defining web of relationships that is Octavian's inner circle. Let's just nail down the family tree first.
Absolutely. First, you have Octavia. She is Octavian's sister, the mother of Marcellus and Mark Antony's former wife, who he publicly and scandalously abandoned for Cleopatra. The source depicts her as a genuine figure of compassion and virtue. She's kind of the moral center that is often eclipsed by Livia.
And then there's Livia, Octavian's wife, the eventual empress of Rome.
She's depicted as small, unremarkable in appearance, and profoundly austere but immensely driven. The source highlights the scandalous nature of their union. Octavian married her while she was still married to another man and pregnant with his child.
And she has 2 sons.
Tiberius, who is serious and taciturn, and Drusus. And Livia's single obsession is securing the succession through her own line, which means Octavian has to designate her sons as his heirs.
It's Julia, Octavian's only biological child, who reveals the depth of Livia's ambition and ruthlessness.
She does. It's really shocking what Julia reveals. She says that Livia sells pregnant slave girls because Livia herself cannot conceive Octavian's heir, a ruthless calculation to maintain control over the household population. Julia also details Livia's vast number of slaves, something like 2,000, who are kept in deep underground passages on the Palatine, completely hidden from public view. It shows you the hidden machinery of Roman power.
And the political tension is centered squarely on Marcellus.
Octavia's son. He is Octavian's nephew and initially the most likely heir, much to Livia's absolute frustration. Julia is strategically engaged to Marcellus, linking him directly to Octavian's immediate bloodline, but the rivalry with Livia's sons Tiberius and Drusus is just fierce and silent.
This tense, secretive, and manipulative domestic setting is the immediate lead-up to the main event.
The triumph, the public humiliation. Selene and Alexander are to be paraded as living trophies, a demonstration that the last of the Hellenistic kingdoms has been absorbed.
And the level of calculated cruelty is just evident in the preparations.
Caesar explicitly instructs Selene to wear a beaded dress, describing it as clothing like a dancer or a lupa.
We should clarify what lupa means.
It literally means she-wolf, but colloquially it meant a prostitute or whore. It's a deliberate act of public degradation, intended to destroy any shred of royal dignity.
But Octavia intervenes.
She's horrified by the instruction, and she intervenes, ensuring that Selene is dressed more modestly. It shows that even within the imperial family, a small pocket of decency still exists.
The procession itself is designed to be overwhelming. Octavian on his chariot, famously stained with vermilion paint to look like the god Jupiter.
And Selene and Alexander are in chains, placed upon a wooden float decorated to look like an Egyptian chamber. They're just props in the new emperor's play.
And the psychological impact is devastating. Alexander freezes when he sees this life-size wax figure of their mother.
Lying on a couch with a cobra coiled between her breasts. This is the moment the full reality of their peril truly hits them.
And it triggers this powerful realization in Alexander.
He realizes no one is ever kept alive after a triumph. He knows instinctively that this spectacle usually ends with the execution of the chief captives.
And his fear is completely justified. They know their half-brother, Antyllus, Mark Antony's son by Fulvia, had already been slaughtered at Caesar's statue back in Alexandria. The elimination of Antony's male heirs was systematic.
So he responds with this desperate, final, masculine act. He pulls a small knife he stole from Marcellus, ready to fight for his life and his sister's.
But Marcellus intervenes in this defining act of compassion.
He sees their chains, maybe recalling his own father's humiliation, and he angrily orders them removed. He assures them they won't be executed.
Marcellus's intervention is so crucial here.
It is. It distinguishes him from the political ruthlessness of Octavian and Livia. It provides this brief flash of humanity in a system designed for cruelty, and it's a debt Selene will never forget. They survive the triumph, but the exposure to the brutality of Roman power has fundamentally changed them forever.
Surviving the triumph means moving from public spectacle to internal political survival. This leads us seamlessly into Section 4, political power, slavery, and Augustus's paranoia.
Right. After the spectacle, Rome continues to grapple with these deep systemic issues, particularly its fundamental reliance on slavery.
And this is where we're introduced to the mysterious figure known only as the Red Eagle.
This rebel starts posting These are public notices, essentially the first Roman newspaper, but the content is revolutionary. It's calling for an end to slavery.
What's unique about the Red Eagle's philosophy?
They're targeting patricians, not slaves, to inspire rebellion. And critically, they oppose assassination. They're advocating for systemic change and reform. This is a philosophical rebellion aimed at the very foundations of Roman society, not just the head of state.
And those foundations were massive. We need to remind ourselves how entrenched slavery was.
It was. While Octavian avoided paying his soldiers in new slaves because he was terrified of another Spartacus rebellion, the source material notes that a staggering one-third of Rome's population was in servitude.
And the system was brutally entrenched. This is horrifyingly illustrated by the Fabius trial, a factual historical event that really underscores the absence of human rights for the enslaved.
It's awful. The source material explains that Selene had witnessed the master, Gaius Fabius, abusing young boys at a temple. When Fabius is murdered, 200 of his slaves are put on trial.
Why so many? Why 200?
Because of this draconian Roman legal principle that dictates collective punishment. If one slave murders a master, all slaves in that household must be punished, regardless of individual guilt or even proximity to the crime. This law was designed to terrorize the enslaved into absolute submission, making every slave a vigilante against every other slave.
And despite pleas for reason and evidence, the Judases find them guilty.
The result is terrifyingly brutal. All 200 slaves are crucified, and the smallest children who could not yet be crucified are poisoned.
That mass execution it's a necessary moment to just pause and reflect on the absolute power of Roman masters.
And the complete non-existence of legal recourse for the enslaved population. This kind of horrific event was just a cost of maintaining the economic structure of Rome.
The sources also detail the constant flow of people into servitude, noting the existence of the columna lactaria,
A place where unwanted infants were abandoned. These foundlings often became slaves or ended up in a lupanar, a brothel. The system was self-sustaining, feeding off the most vulnerable.
It's against this backdrop of brutality that the Red Eagle's campaign escalates. Octavian, now feeling secure, is nearly assassinated.
By an actor at the Theater of Pompeii, a massive historical setting sometimes used by the Senate.
And who saves him?
Juba. Selene screams a warning, and Juba tackles Octavian, saving his life.
Following this attempt, the Red Eagle posts another actum.
This time publicly criticizing Octavian for his security failures. The content shows deep knowledge of the Palatines, specifically access to the Temple of Apollo, which is right near Augustus's villa.
This immediately sends Augustus's paranoia soaring.
He vows to crucify the Red Eagle, and the suspicion falls first on the inner circle. Tiberius and Marcellus are immediately suspected, Livia using this as a chance to undermine Marcellus. But the investigation also targets less obvious figures like Magister Varius, a freedman teacher, and Gallia, Octavia's favorite slave and Selene's attendant. It shows how suspicion just cuts across every class barrier.
The deep dive then takes us out of Rome to Capri for a summer retreat, where we witness the famous incident at Pollio's villa.
Yes, Augustus wants to project relaxation, but the sheer scale of wealth and cruelty is immediately apparent. Pollio's villa is enormous, housing over 3,000 slaves.
And he keeps eels.
A vast pool filled with sharp-toothed moray eels, purely for entertainment. And the incident we are about to describe is one of the most famous historical anecdotes used to define Augustus's calculated cruelty and power.
A slave breaks a crystal goblet. Costly mistake.
Pollio, without a second thought, orders the slave thrown to the eels as punishment. It is the ultimate expression of casual, sadistic cruelty by the Roman elite. The source describes the horror of the event. But then, in a shocking display, either of genuine revulsion or masterful political calculation, Octavian intervenes.
How does he do it? How does he intervene without directly challenging his host?
He smashes all the crystal on his own table. He challenges Pollio directly. Will you be feeding me to the eels as well? Octavian uses his absolute political authority to force Pollio to free the slave. He is reminding everyone present that he is the ultimate source of life and death, and that he will not tolerate the excesses of his subjects, even if he relies on the system itself.
A perfect example of his tightrope walk, maintaining the system while performing acts of clemency to enhance his own image.
And the Red Eagle is watching, absolutely. The rebel posts his very next actum on Capri, praising Caesar's act of clemency regarding the slave and the eels. This proves the Red Eagle knew exactly what happened inside that private, heavily guarded villa. He is either someone extremely close to Augustus or
Juba, who was present for the assassination attempt and the eel pool incident.
This careful build-up culminates in the Juba revelation. Selene, driven by the trauma of the Fabius trial and Livia's cruelty, attempts to buy Gallia's freedom using Cleopatra's most valuable possession, her famous pearl necklace.
Juba facilitates the sale.
He does. He ensures Octavia receives enough denarii, enough currency to manumit Gallia. This is a costly act, showing Juba's increasing protectiveness over Selene and her few remaining allies.
And Selene later has her breakthrough moment.
She realizes Juba had been protecting her all along. The guards confirm that someone had been secretly putting gold into her treasury. It wasn't Octavia, it was Juba.
She connects the dots.
Juba, the highly respected general, the scholar who constantly had access to the Palatine, is the Red Eagle. He was using his position to write philosophical and political tracts against the institution of slavery, hiding in plain sight. He was exploiting his high status to advocate for systemic change and to protect those around him, like Magister Varius, who was wrongfully accused.
This hidden role, the respected Roman soldier who is secretly the revolutionary against slavery, is brilliant, but it puts him in ultimate danger.
It does. The source material notes that Juba fakes his death with bull's blood during a fire at the Basilica Julia, a real historical event, allowing him to disappear and escape Augustus's immediate paranoia. The secret is held closely by Selene until the moment Octavian summons her.
This brings us to the devastating Section 5, Tragedy and the Rise of a New Dynasty. Before Selene is offered her future, there is one final brutal act that defines her survival.
The assassination of her twin, Alexander Helios.
Augustus sends a letter announcing he's arranging marriages for both of them,
Creating this false sense of security. But Alexander, who is now 15 and approaching manhood, is seen as too great a political threat. He is the son of Antony and Cleopatra. His lineage could still ignite a rebellion against Rome's stability.
He's run through with a gladius, that short Roman stabbing sword, as he flees an alleged encounter with rebels. Augustus fabricates a story about Alexander being involved in sedition.
But Selene immediately sees the truth. Augustus never intended to let Antony's son live long enough to wear the toga virilis, the simple white toga that symbolized his official entrance into Roman manhood. Caesarion was killed, Antyllus was slaughtered, and Alexander was the final piece in the systematic elimination of Antony's older male children.
The emotional cost is just profound.
Selene is left with this numbing grief and survivor's guilt, while Alexander's male lover, Lucius, weeps uncontrollably, providing a critical emotional contrast and highlighting the true cost of this high-stakes political game.
It's in the immediate aftermath of this profound tragedy that Augustus summons Selene to discuss her future.
He is chillingly honest, acknowledging that Antony and Cleopatra's adult son would always be too much of a risk to Rome.
And what is his proposal?
It's incredibly pragmatic. A dowry of 5,000 denarii and the title of Queen of Mauritania, and then Juba, whom she believed dead, the secret Red Eagle, reappears, having faked his demise.
So Juba was always working for Augustus to protect Selene, and the Red Eagle persona was a means of rebellion against slavery that used the political climate, but didn't actually target Augustus's life.
Precisely. Juba was operating in a complex space. He was loyal to Augustus's idea of a strong, unified Rome, but he used his intellectual position to fight the institution of slavery. His reappearance confirms to Selene that he had been securing her survival and his own opportunity to finally implement his ideals.
Their marriage, which takes place in 25 BC, is initially a political union orchestrated by Augustus.
It is, securing a client kingdom in North Africa. However, the source notes that it blossoms into a genuine and lasting love story.
And they immediately set about establishing their legitimacy.
They renamed their capital Awolja to Caesarea, declaring public loyalty to Augustus to secure their stability. This act, however, frees them to cultivate their own unique kingdom.
And this is where Selene's legacy truly blossoms. She doesn't build Rome in Mauritania.
She rebuilds Alexandria. She uses her Ptolemaic education and heritage to rebuild Caesarea, focusing intensely on learning and Hellenistic refinement. The archaeological evidence confirms this. Statues of Egyptian priests and Dionysus were found there, showing her direct influence in transplanting the cultural heart of the city Octavian conquered into the far Roman West.
And Juba's legacy complements hers perfectly.
He is remembered less for his military role and more for his scholarship. He's credited with discovering and naming the Canary Islands, Insularia, Canaria, Islands of the Dogs, and wrote the definitive treatise Libica. Pliny the Elder wrote that Juba was more remembered for the quality of his scholarship even than for his reign.
And here's the true, quiet victory of the Red Eagle.
Yes. The historical record confirms that slavery slowly but demonstrably disappeared in Mauritania after their arrival. Juba, once given the power of a king, implemented his anti-slavery ideals on a national scale. Selene, the captive princess, achieved political stability and enlightened rule, a feat her mother, Cleopatra, never managed in the chaos of the civil wars.
But the shadow of Rome still looms large, and we have to contrast Selene's quiet success with the dramatic and brutal fates of the Spares and the immediate family of Augustus. Let's start with Marcellus.
The charming heir who showed Selene kindness, Marcellus, who is married to Julia, dies suddenly in 23 BC, only 2 years after the marriage. This instantly ends the dreams of Octavia and Julia for the succession and plunges the imperial household into a political vacuum. He is buried in Augustus's newly constructed mausoleum, marking the first great tragedy of the new dynasty.
And Julia's subsequent life is just defined by these forced political marriages.
All intended to secure Augustus's future. First, she is married to the much older Agrippa, who is forced to divorce Octavia's daughter Claudia for the union. After Agrippa dies, she's married to her reluctant stepbrother, Tiberius.
She's essentially an object of state policy.
And she eventually breaks under the suffocating pressure. She rebels in the most dangerous way possible. She takes Selene's half-brother, Antonius' son of Antony and Fulvia, as a lover, creating a direct political threat to Augustus's carefully constructed image of morality and family virtue.
Augustus's reaction is swift and absolutely devastating. He sentences his own daughter for adultery and treason.
The punishment is absolute. Antonius is forced to commit suicide. Julia is banished to the desolate, tiny island of Pandateria. She is confined, and, after Augustus's death, Tiberius confines her further. The historical sources confirm she eventually dies of starvation, utterly destroyed by the very system her father created.
This dramatic contrast is startling. The Ptolemaic daughter, Selene, secures a stable, intellectual kingdom and a loving partnership with a man she genuinely loves. Meanwhile, the Roman daughter, Julia, dies in starvation and political exile, destroyed by the ruthless necessity of Roman imperial politics.
It forces you to reevaluate who truly won the war of survival. Selene navigated the shark-infested waters of Augustus's Palatine and emerged free. Julia was consumed by them.
That brings us to our synthesis. This entire deep dive has chronicled the immense cultural and political shift from the stunning opulence of Alexandria to the calculated politics and hidden brutalities of Rome.
And Selene, initially a captive, navigated that system not just with resilience, but with profound political intelligence. Her survival was an act of profound political agency. She was a pawn who ultimately seized control of her destiny by forging a partnership with Juba II, leveraging her Ptolemaic education and his subtle revolutionary ideals, creating a joint legacy that endured long after Rome's direct conquest.
And what the source material shows is the surprising modernity of the issues being confronted in this era.
It really does. We see elements of the modern abortion debate referenced by the poet Ovid, discussing women who terminate pregnancies to avoid stretch marks or to avoid the tragedy of having more children than they can afford in the crowded city.
And we also see the constant philosophical grappling with the reality of slavery. Seneca the Younger's letter advises a friend to treat slaves well, reminding him they are fellow human beings and fellow slaves under the control of fate, a recognition that the system itself is brutal and arbitrary.
We've covered brutal state trials, massive public works, political assassinations, and the constant awareness of espionage, all under the shadow of symbols that still persist today. From the Acta Diurna, which served as the first public newspaper, to the familiar Roman initials SPQR, standing for the Senate and the people of Rome.
The entire deep dive reveals how precarious political power was, even at the very peak of the Roman Empire.
Defined by paranoia, forced marriages, and the constant, ruthless need to police public image, a theme as relevant today as it was 2,000 years ago.
So here's our final provocative thought for you to chew on. Cleopatra Selene's final, enduring victory was not in defeating Rome, but in transplanting the cultural and intellectual heart of the Alexandria that Octavian conquered, its focus on learning and Hellenistic refinement, into Mauritania. She created a court that, in terms of intellectual achievement, outshone even the Palatine. So considering the dramatic and brutal fates of Octavian's immediate family, Marcellus dead, Julia banished and starved, who truly was the ultimate survivor of that pivotal era? Was it the architect of the empire or the foreign princess he thought he had utterly neutralized?